Okay, so let's be honest. Foreclosure. It's a scary word for a lot of people.
It is.
It can feel overwhelming, like you're just drowning in all this financial stress and legal jargon. So we're diving into a guide today that I think will really help anyone in this situation. It's from the National REO Brokers Association.
The NRBA.
Yeah, exactly. They specialize in distressed properties, and this guide is full of practical advice.
And I think you'll be glad to know it's very straightforward, doesn't sugarcoat anything. It actually starts by acknowledging just how heavy the emotional toll of foreclosure can be.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's not just about the money.
Right. It talks about the stress, the anxiety, even the shame that some people feel.
So it's important to address those feelings right up front.
Absolutely. The guide emphasizes that ignoring or burying your emotions can actually lead to bad decisions.
Oh, so it can actually make the situation worse.
Exactly. So it encourages seeking support, whether that's therapy support groups or even just talking to friends and family you trust.
Got it. So step one is acknowledging those feelings. What comes next?
Next, you need to understand that foreclosure, it's time sensitive. The timeline can vary depending on what state you're in.
Okay, that makes sense. Different states, different laws.
Right. And some states have really fast foreclosure processes.
Oh, wow. Like how fast are we talking?
In some areas, it can be as little as 104 days.
104 days. That's putting on the pressure.
Yeah, it definitely creates a sense of urgency.
So does the guide recommend trying to delay foreclosure to buy more time?
It actually advises against that. Delaying often just leads to more stress, more financial strain, and it can further damage your credit.
So taking action quickly is the best way to regain some control.
Exactly. The sooner you act, the more options you'll have.
Yeah.
And one of the best things you can do is connect with an NRBA member.
Okay. Now, I know we mentioned the NRBA at the top of the show, but just to remind folks, who are they?
They're real estate professionals who specialize in distressed properties, meaning they really understand foreclosure inside and out.
So they can help guide you through this complicated process.
Exactly. NRBA members can help you understand your options, negotiate with your lender, and avoid some serious pitfalls.
Speaking of pitfalls, we have to talk about foreclosure scams.
Oh, yeah. They're out there.
And they're pretty common. What should people watch out for?
The guide lists several red flags. One is demanding upfront fees. Legitimate professionals don't usually operate that way.
Right, that makes sense.
Another one is pressure tactics, where someone tries to rush you into a decision.
Oh, yeah, I've heard about that one.
And always be wary of anyone making promises that sound too good to be true, like guaranteeing they can stop the foreclosure completely.
So if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is.
Exactly. The guide really emphasizes doing your research on anyone who offers help. Don't be afraid to ask questions, check their credentials, get everything in writing.
So a healthy dose of skepticism is a good thing.
Absolutely. And if you're ever unsure, an NRBA member can help steer you clear of those scams.
Okay, that's good to know. Now, we've talked about acknowledging those tough emotions, taking quick action, connecting with an NRBA member, and being wary of scams. What else is important to know at this early stage?
I'd say understanding what an REO is crucial. It stands for real estate owned.
Ah, so that's where the REO and National REO Brokers Association comes from.
Exactly. It refers to properties that the lender takes possession of after a failed foreclosure auction.
Okay, so that's why they're the experts in dealing with these types of properties.
Right. And knowing about REOs is important because if your home does go to auction, you might be able to negotiate with the lender to buy it back as an REO.
So even if things progress that far, there might still be a chance to reclaim your home.
Possibly. It's not always an option, but it's worth exploring with an NRBA member. They can assess your specific situation and see if it's a possibility.
Okay, so there's a glimmer of hope there. And speaking of hope, I think this is a good place to pause for now. We've covered the initial steps, the precautions to take. But now I want to dive a bit deeper into the emotional and practical challenges of actually navigating foreclosure. So stay tuned. We'll be right back after a quick break.
Looking forward to it.
Welcome back. So we just talked about the importance of taking action, understanding REOs, and watching out for those scams. But even with all the right knowledge, foreclosure has got to be an emotional roller coaster.
It really is.
What did the guide say about coping with all that?
Yeah, the guide doesn't shy away from that emotional side. It talks about all kinds of hardships beyond just the financial stuff, like feeling harassed by debt collectors.
Oh, yeah. I can only imagine.
And on top of that, you might feel judged by your neighbors. You know, people watching as investors come by to scope out the property.
That would make me feel so vulnerable.
Exactly. And then there are the frequent inspections, people coming in and out of your home. It's like you're losing your privacy on top of everything else.
So it's like adding insult to injury. It's not just losing your home, it's losing your sense of peace and stability, too.
Right. The guide offers some coping strategies. It talks about seeking professional counseling.
That makes sense. Having a therapist to talk to can be really helpful during times like this.
Yeah, they can offer a safe, neutral space to process all these difficult feelings.
What about support groups?
The guide suggests that too. Connecting with others who are going through the same thing can make you feel less alone.
Right. It's that we're all in this together feeling. But honestly, support groups aren't for everyone.
True, some people might find them intimidating or just not a good fit.
So what's the alternative?
The guide emphasizes the importance of leaning on your personal network, talking to your friends and family.
Even if it's hard to talk about?
Yeah, even if it's hard, keeping them informed and sharing your worries can actually help you stay focused.
It's like sharing the weight so you don't have to carry it all alone.
Exactly. And while you're taking care of yourself emotionally, it's also important to prioritize self-care.
I know this might sound a little frivolous when you're facing foreclosure, but I get it. When things are stressful, sometimes the basic stuff goes out the window, like eating well and sleeping enough.
Exactly. But the guide stresses how important those things are for making sound decisions. And just for staying resilient during a tough time.
It's like giving yourself permission to pause and recharge.
Exactly. Even small acts of self-care can make a difference. Taking a walk, listening to music, meditating.
Just taking a moment to breathe.
Right. And along with that, the guide also talks about shifting your focus to the future.
Now that might sound strange to some people. Like, how can you think about the future when you're dealing with so much uncertainty in the present?
I know, it sounds counterintuitive. But the guide suggests setting small goals. Even something as simple as, I will research affordable housing options today.
So it's about taking baby steps and giving yourself a sense of control over the situation.
Exactly. It's about planting those seeds of hope for the future, even in the middle of all this.
I like that analogy.
Mhm.
So while foreclosure can be a really tough emotional experience, there are things you can do to cope and stay grounded.
Absolutely. Now let's shift gears a bit and talk about something that I'm sure is on a lot of people's minds, bankruptcy.
Yeah, that's a big one. Is it a viable option during foreclosure?
The guide offers a balanced perspective. It acknowledges that bankruptcy can provide temporary relief from creditors.
That sounds good. But I'm guessing there's a catch.
Well, it's not a magic solution. It can have some long-term consequences.
Like what?
The biggest one is the impact on your credit score. Bankruptcy stays on your credit report for years.
Wow. So it could make it harder to get loans or even rent an apartment down the line.
Exactly. So it's not a decision to be taken lightly. The guide strongly advises talking to a lawyer who specializes in bankruptcy.
Okay, so bankruptcy is complex.
Yeah.
Before we move on, can you quickly explain the different chapters of bankruptcy?
Sure. The two main chapters that apply to foreclosure are Chapter 7 and Chapter 13. Chapter 7 is often called liquidation bankruptcy. It allows you to discharge certain debts, but it doesn't always protect your home.
So what about Chapter 13?
Chapter 13 is known as reorganization bankruptcy. It allows you to set up a repayment plan over 3 to 5 years.
That sounds like it might be a better option if you want to try and keep your home.
It can be, but it requires having a steady income to make those payments.
Okay, so it's not a one-size-fits-all solution. Each situation is different.
Exactly, and that's why it's so important to get expert legal advice. Now, speaking of things to be cautious of, let's revisit those scams we talked about earlier.
Yeah, it's like people try to take advantage of you when you're already down. Are there any other scams that the guide specifically calls out?
One that stands out is the foreclosure rescue scam.
What's that?
It's when a scammer pretends to be a legitimate business offering to help you save your home.
Oh, wow. So they prey on people's desperation.
Yeah, they often use high-pressure tactics and make big promises, like they can modify your loan or stop the foreclosure process altogether.
But it's all just a lie.
Basically. And they usually charge huge fees for these services that never materialize.
So how can you avoid falling for these scams?
Knowledge is power. The guide says be skeptical of anyone who promises a quick fix, especially if they want money up front.
Right. That's always a red flag.
Always check their credentials, get everything in writing, and if you're not sure, consult with a trusted professional like an NRBA member.
Okay. So a healthy dose of skepticism is key.
Definitely trust your gut. If something feels off, it probably is. Now let's shift gears and talk about something more hopeful life after foreclosure.
Because it's not the end of the world, right?
Not at all. The guide actually ends on a very encouraging note. It assures you that foreclosure doesn't have to define you or your future.
That's good to hear. What kind of advice does it offer for getting back on your feet?
It focuses on three key areas: rebuilding your credit, finding new housing, and continuing to take care of your emotional well-being.
Okay, those all make sense. Rebuilding your credit is probably essential for anything you want to do financially in the future.
Exactly. The guide gives some practical tips like paying your bills on time, reducing your debt, and avoiding new credit applications while you're rebuilding your credit history.
So it's a long game. It takes discipline and consistency.
Right. What about finding new housing?
That can be tough after foreclosure.
You're right. But remember those NRBA members we talked about? They can be really helpful here, too. They have a lot of knowledge about the local housing market.
So they can help you find something that fits your budget.
Exactly. And here's a bit of good news. Some lenders actually offer relocation assistance to homeowners who have gone through foreclosure.
Oh, really? Tell me more about that.
It's not guaranteed, but some lenders will provide financial assistance to help cover your moving expenses.
That would be a huge help. What about the emotional side of things? How do you move on after such a stressful experience?
The guide emphasizes the importance of self-care and seeking support, whether that's through therapy support groups or just leaning on your friends and family.
So it's about taking care of yourself holistically.
Exactly. The guide's ultimate message is one of hope and resilience. Foreclosure is a setback, but it doesn't have to be the end of your story.
That's a powerful message. It sounds like this guide is full of really helpful information and advice.
It really is. Now, we've covered a lot of ground, but there's one crucial piece of the puzzle we haven't talked about yet: the actual foreclosure process itself.
Yeah, we've talked about what happens before and after, but not the actual steps involved.
Exactly. And understanding that process is key to navigating it effectively. So that's what we'll be diving into in the next part of our depth dive.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
We'll be right back after a quick break. Okay, so we're back for the final part of our foreclosure deep dive. And I have to say, we've covered a lot of ground, haven't we?
We have.
We talked about the emotional impact, the scams to watch out for, even bankruptcy. But there's one key piece we haven't really delved into yet.
The foreclosure process itself.
Exactly. The nuts and bolts of how it actually works. So let's walk through it step by step.
Sounds good.
What's the very first thing that happens?
Well, usually it starts with missed mortgage payments.
Okay, that makes sense.
So when you fall behind, the lender is going to try to contact you.
Right. They don't just immediately jump to foreclosure.
No, they don't. They actually want to work with you to find a solution.
So what kind of solutions might they offer at this point?
It could be a few things. They might suggest a loan modification.
Okay, so that's where they adjust the terms of your loan to make the payments more manageable.
Exactly. Or they might offer forbearance.
Forbearance. Now, that's where they temporarily suspend your payments.
Right. It gives you some breathing room to get back on your feet financially.
Okay, so there are options at this stage. It's not a hopeless situation.
Not at all. This is where an NRBA member can be a really valuable asset.
They can help you navigate those options.
Exactly. They can help you understand what's available, gather the necessary documentation, and negotiate with the lender on your behalf.
So having an expert in your corner can make a big difference.
It really can. But let's say those negotiation efforts don't pan out and you continue to miss payments.
Then things start to get more serious.
Yes. The lender will eventually file a notice of default.
Okay, what is that exactly?
It's a legal document. It officially kicks off the foreclosure process.
So that's a pretty big deal.
It is. It's basically a formal notification saying you're in default on your mortgage and the lender is starting foreclosure proceedings.
Okay, so it's a serious wake-up call. But even at this point, there's still a chance to stop the process, right?
Yes. Typically, the notice of default includes a grace period.
How long is that grace period?
It varies, but it's usually a few miles.
So you still have time to catch up on payments or find another solution?
Exactly. But it's a crucial window. You have to act quickly.
And probably get some professional guidance.
Absolutely. Now, what if you can't catch up during that grace period?
Then what happens?
Well, usually the next step is a notice of sale.
Okay, and what does that mean?
It means your home is going to be sold at a public auction.
Oh, wow. To the highest bidder.
Yes.
Where do these auctions usually take place?
Typically at the county courthouse or another designated location.
So it's a pretty formal process.
It is. And it can be intimidating.
So even at this stage, someone else could come in and buy my home.
Unfortunately, yes. But it's important to know that you still have rights throughout this process.
Really? What kind of rights do I have?
You still have the right to try and negotiate with a lender.
Even at this late stage?
Yes.
Yeah.
You could try to modify the loan or enter a short sale agreement or even reinstate the mortgage by paying the full amount owed.
Wow. I had no idea you could still negotiate at that point.
It's not always successful, but it's worth exploring all options.
Okay, so the auction happens. Let's say someone else buys my home. What happens then?
Well, there are a couple of possibilities. If the winning bid is higher than what you owe on the mortgage, any surplus funds would go to you. Oh, wow. So I could potentially get money back even after losing my home.
It's possible. It's not the most common scenario, but it can happen.
Okay, so there's a slight silver lining there. But what if the winning bid is less than what I owe?
That's more common, unfortunately. And in that case, you might still be responsible for the remaining balance.
What do you call that?
It's called a deficiency judgment.
That doesn't sound good.
No, it's not ideal.
Yeah.
But you might be able to negotiate with the lender to reduce that amount or work out a payment plan.
Okay, so even after the auction, it's not necessarily over.
Right. Now, what if the auction doesn't result in a sale?
What happens to the house then?
If no one buys it at the auction, the lender usually takes ownership of the property.
Ah, so that's where the term REO comes in.
Exactly. Real estate owned.
And at that point, could I potentially buy my home back from the lender?
It's a possibility worth exploring. They might be willing to sell it back to you as an REO, often at a discounted price.
Wow, I had no idea. There were so many twists and turns in this process. It's definitely not straightforward, but the key is to understand the steps, know your rights, and get expert guidance along the way.
This has been incredibly helpful, and I think we've covered pretty much everything you need to know about navigating foreclosure. Any final words of wisdom for our listeners?
I think the most important thing to remember is this: foreclosure is a process, not an event.
That's a good way to put it.
It's a series of steps, each with its own challenges, opportunities. And by understanding those steps, seeking guidance from professionals, and prioritizing your well-being, you can navigate this difficult time and ultimately reclaim your future.
That's a powerful message. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us today.
It's been my pleasure.
And to our listeners, we hope you found this deep dive into navigating foreclosure informative and empowering. Remember, you are not alone. There are resources available to support you every step of the way. And with knowledge, support, and a proactive approach, you can overcome this challenge and create a brighter future for yourself. Thank you for joining us. And on that note of hope and resilience, we want to thank Skip Benton for today's information. Skip is a member of NRBA covering Northern Nevada. No matter where you live in the United States, if you have any questions, please contact Skip.